Right now, somewhere in a vault, there's a piece of paper worth exactly nothing. No value in the fiber, no worth in the ink. And yet people have killed for it, built empires on it, lost their families chasing it. That paper only means something because millions of strangers, who will never meet, silently agreed that it would. Here's what almost nobody tells you. The bill in your wallet was never the money. It was only ever a symbol, a placeholder for something invisible that moves long before the cash ever does. Napoleon Hill spent decades studying men who built fortunes from nothing, and he kept finding the exact same pattern hiding underneath every one of their stories. They understood something the rest of us were never taught in school, at the dinner table, or anywhere else. Stay with me, because by the middle of this video, you're going to understand exactly what that invisible thing is and how to start working with it instead of against it, starting today. If you've made it this far, it's because you're determined to have a life of success. So I invite you to subscribe to the channel, because every video will help you develop the mindset that attracts wealth, prosperity, and new opportunities every day. Let's start with something simple. Think about the last time you paid for coffee with a tap of your phone. No paper changed hands. No coins clinked in your palm. A number went down on one screen somewhere, and a number went up on another, and the barista handed you a cup like nothing unusual had happened at all. And nothing had, because what you were exchanging was never the paper to begin with. It was an idea about value, moving from one place to another faster than you could blink. Here's a fact most people never stop to consider. Paper currency, the kind you can fold and put in a pocket, has only existed in its modern form for a couple of centuries. Value itself, the thing money is supposed to represent, has existed as long as humans have. Before there were coins, there was trade. A farmer would carry a sack of grain to a man who raised goats, and they'd agree, without any government, without any bank, that a certain amount of one was worth a certain amount of the other. Nobody signed a contract. Nobody needed to. The agreement itself was the value. Money, in other words, was never the wheat and never the goat. It was the agreement sitting quietly between them. Now hold that thought, because this is where it gets uncomfortable in the best possible way. If money is really an agreement, a shared belief about worth, then the $20 bill in your wallet isn't a source of value at all. It's a receipt, a record of value that already happened somewhere else, in someone's mind, before it ever touched your hand. And if that's true, then chasing the paper, chasing the number on the screen, chasing the account balance, is a little like chasing the shadow of a bird instead of watching where the bird actually flies. Napoleon Hill spent a good portion of his life around men who had built extraordinary fortunes, men whose names still show up in history books. And one thing he noticed over and over was that none of them started with money. They started with an idea, held on to with a kind of stubbornness most people would call unreasonable, and the money showed up afterward, almost as proof the idea had been right all along. He didn't call this luck. He called it a mental process, one that could be studied, and more importantly, repeated. Think about that for a second, because it rearranges something most of us were raised to believe. We were taught, without anyone ever saying it out loud, that money comes first and the good life comes after. Get the job, get the paycheck, then maybe, eventually, get the freedom. But every self-made fortune Hill studied ran in the opposite direction. The freedom, the vision, the burning want for something specific came first. The money was just the evidence that showed up later, trailing behind like a shadow trails a body in the afternoon sun. Here's an image that might help. Imagine standing in a dark room holding a flashlight. The light isn't the wall it lands on, and you never really see the light itself, only where it touches something solid. Money works the same way. You never actually interact with money. You interact with what it touches. The car, the house, the paid-off debt, the number in the account. All of that is the wall. The light itself, the force doing the actual work, has always been something else, something you can't fold into a wallet. This is where most people get stuck, and it isn't their fault. Because nobody ever sits a teenager down and explains it clearly. We're handed a system built entirely around the wall, bank statements, price tags, interest rates, and every one of them feels urgent and real. But every one of them is a downstream effect, not the source. Trying to fix your financial life by staring harder at the wall is like trying to brighten a room by scrubbing the paint instead of reaching for the switch. So here's the question worth sitting with for a moment, the one we'll keep circling back to. If money isn't the paper, and it isn't the number on the screen, and it isn't even really the bank account at all, then what is it actually made of? What is the raw material? Because once you can name that material, once you can hold it clearly in your mind the way you'd hold a tool in your hand, something in how you approach every single dollar you touch starts to shift. Quietly at first, then unmistakably. We're going to get there. But first, there's a piece of this puzzle that has nothing to do with wealth at all, and everything to do with why so many hardworking, intelligent people stay stuck in the exact same financial place for years, sometimes decades, without ever understanding why. Here's the piece nobody talks about at the dinner table. Two people can grow up on the same street, go to the same school, even work the same job for the same paycheck, and one of them will spend their whole life circling the drain financially while the other builds something real. Same opportunities, roughly speaking, same hours in the day, and yet completely different outcomes. For years, that difference gets blamed on luck, or timing, or who your parents happen to know. But Napoleon Hill, after studying hundreds of people who had accumulated real wealth, kept running into a different explanation. He called it money consciousness, and its opposite, the far more common one, he called poverty consciousness. Neither of those has anything to do with how much is currently sitting in your bank account. A person can be broke and still carry a money consciousness. A person can inherit a fortune and still carry a poverty consciousness underneath the nice suit. What Hill was pointing to was something quieter than a bank balance. It was a settled, background assumption about what a person is allowed to have. Most people never examine that assumption a single time in their lives. They just live inside it, the way a fish lives inside water, never noticing it's even there. Let me tell you about a man named Edwin Barnes, because his story says more than any explanation could. Barnes showed up at Thomas Edison's laboratory with almost nothing to his name, no formal training, no connections, barely the means to get there. And when he stood in front of Edison, he didn't ask for a job. He announced that he had come to become Edison's business partner, not an employee, a partner. He had no capital, no leverage, nothing you could point to and call an asset. Except one thing. He had already decided, with a kind of finality most people never reach about anything, that this was going to happen. Not hoped. Decided. He took whatever ordinary work was offered just to stay near the goal, and he waited, refusing to leave the vicinity of the opportunity he'd already claimed for himself in his mind. Years passed before Edison needed someone to distribute a new invention, a dictating machine nobody else wanted to touch. Barnes was standing right there. He became the exclusive distributor, and eventually exactly what he'd announced on day one. A partner. A wealthy one. Now here's the part that matters for you and me. Sitting here, nowhere near a laboratory in New Jersey. Barnes didn't manifest a check out of thin air. What he did was something far more specific and far more repeatable. He held one idea in his mind with such consistency that his behavior reorganized itself around it, automatically, almost without his noticing. Every decision he made afterward, where to work, who to talk to, what to tolerate, ran through that same filter. That's not mysticism. That's attention. And attention, it turns out, is one of the most physically real forces a human being possesses. There's a part of your brain, tucked deep near the base of your skull, whose entire job is filtering. Every second, your senses take in far more information than your conscious mind could ever process. So this small structure decides what gets through and what gets ignored. It's the same reason that the moment you're thinking about buying a certain car, you suddenly start seeing that exact model everywhere, on every street, in every parking lot. The cars were always there. Your filter simply wasn't tuned to notice them. Opportunity works precisely the same way. It isn't rare. It's filtered out over and over by a mind that's been trained, usually without permission, to expect scarcity instead of expecting access. This is where poverty consciousness does its quiet damage. It doesn't announce itself as fear. It shows up as caution that feels like wisdom, as small thinking that feels like realism, as a flinch, so automatic you'd swear it was just common sense. Every time an opportunity requires you to risk something before you're allowed to see the reward. Meanwhile, the person standing right next to you, facing the identical opportunity, walks straight through the door, simply because their filter was never trained to slam it shut. So the question isn't whether you have willpower or intelligence or a good work ethic. Plenty of people stuck in poverty consciousness have all three. The real question is quieter and far more uncomfortable to sit with. What has your mind been trained, over years, maybe decades, to filter in, and what has it been trained to filter out, long before any actual money ever entered the picture? That filter didn't build itself. Nobody arrives in the world already convinced that money is scarce or dangerous or something other people get to have. That belief gets installed, one small sentence at a time, usually by people who loved you and had no idea what they were doing to your future. Think back, honestly, to the phrases that floated around your house growing up. We can't afford that. Money doesn't grow on trees. People like us don't get those kinds of opportunities. Rich people will step on anyone to get ahead. Maybe nobody in your house ever said those exact words, but some version of them was probably in the air, the way smoke settles into curtains without anyone noticing the smell anymore. And here's the part that changes everything once you see it. Every one of those sentences, repeated enough times, becomes something close to a hypnotic suggestion, absorbed by a mind too young to question it. Napoleon Hill actually named this mechanism directly. He called it autosuggestion, and he considered it one of the most powerful forces available to a human being, for better or worse. His entire framework rested on a simple, almost unsettling premise. Whatever thought you deliberately and repeatedly plan in your mind, especially one charged with real emotion, eventually gets accepted by the subconscious and starts shaping your actions to match it. He taught this as something to use on purpose, deliberately, toward a goal you'd chosen. But he also understood the reverse was happening to nearly everyone, by accident, their entire childhood. Nobody sat down and chose to install a poverty consciousness. It got installed anyway, one dinner table comment at a time, purely through repetition. And repetition, it turns out, isn't just a psychological idea. It's physical, down at the level of brain tissue. Every time a thought fires through your mind, it travels along a specific pathway of neurons. Fire that same pathway enough times, and the brain does something remarkable. It reinforces the connection, wraps it in more insulation, makes it faster and more automatic the next time. Scientists have a phrase for this, simple enough to remember. Neurons that fire together, wire together. A thought you've had 10,000 times isn't just familiar anymore. It's a superhighway, effortless, automatic. While a thought you've barely entertained, an unfamiliar belief like I am the kind of person money flows toward, stays a narrow, overgrown trail your mind has to hack through by hand, every single time, until it doesn't. This is not a character flaw. Say that to yourself slowly, because so many people carry a quiet shame about their financial situation, as if it proves something about their worth or their intelligence or how hard they've tried. It doesn't. You didn't choose the highway that got built through your mind before you were old enough to vote, or drive, or even add numbers together. A child doesn't audit the beliefs handed to them. They absorb them, because that's what childhood brains are built to do. Absorb and adapt to whatever environment they're dropped into. None of that was your fault. But here's where it stops being only about the past. The same mechanism that built that highway without your permission can build a new one, this time with it. Neuroplasticity doesn't retire after childhood. It slows, but it never stops. Every adult brain on this planet is still capable of carving new pathways, still capable of taking an unfamiliar thought and, through deliberate repetition, turning it into something automatic. That's not a metaphor. That's documented, observable brain function. The same tool that worked against you for 20 or 30 years can be picked up and pointed in the other direction, starting today, with something as small and as deliberate as a single sentence, repeated on purpose, until it stops feeling foreign. So let's use that tool right now, together, in a small way. Down in the comments, I want you to write one phrase, and I want you to actually type it, not just think it, because the act of typing engages your mind differently than a passing thought ever could. Write wealth mindset. Just those 2 words. Not because typing them will hand you a fortune by morning, nobody's promising you that, but because every rep matters. Every deliberate repetition is one more pass along a new pathway, one more brick laid on a road that didn't exist in your mind yesterday. Write it, and let it be the first small, honest step of building a highway that finally leads somewhere you actually want to go. Let's go back to the question we left sitting on the table a few minutes ago. If money isn't the paper, and it isn't the number on a screen, what is it actually made of? What's the raw material? We're close now. But before we get there, there's one distinction that has to be completely clear, because without it, everything else in this video will slide right off you like water off glass. Wanting something and deciding on something are not the same event. They only look similar from the outside. Almost everyone wants more money. Ask 100 strangers on the street if they'd like a better financial life, and 99 of them will say yes without a second of hesitation. But wanting costs nothing. It requires no risk, no discomfort, no confrontation with your own current limitations. You can want something for 30 years, comfortably, from the couch, and never once have it disturb your daily habits. A decision is a different animal entirely. A decision closes a door behind you. It removes the option of staying exactly where you are, unchanged, indefinitely. That's precisely why so few people ever make one, even about something they claim to want desperately. Deciding is uncomfortable. Wanting is free. Napoleon Hill built an entire philosophy around this exact distinction, and he gave it a name that sounds almost too simple to matter. Definiteness of purpose. Not a general wish for wealth, not a vague hope that things improve, but a specific, named target, held in the mind with enough clarity that you could describe it to a stranger in one sentence. He studied men who'd amassed extraordinary fortunes, and nearly all of them, at some identifiable point, had stopped wishing and started deciding. The wish had a fog to it. The decision had edges. Think about the difference this makes in something as ordinary as a Tuesday afternoon. A man who wants to start a business might think about it while stuck in traffic, daydream about it during a boring meeting, mention it once at a barbecue, and go home to watch television, exactly like he did the night before and the night before that. A man who has decided to start a specific business, by a specific date, doing a specific thing for a specific customer, behaves like an entirely different person, even though from across the street the two of them look identical. He researches during his lunch break instead of scrolling. He asks a harder question in a conversation most people would let slide. He says no to a Friday night that would have cost him Saturday morning's focus. None of that looks dramatic. None of it makes for an exciting story. But compounded across months, it produces a completely different life than the one built on wishing. Here's the part that connects everything we've walked through so far. Remember the flashlight. Remember the highway carved into your brain by repetition. A decision, a real one, with an edge to it, is what points the flashlight in a specific direction instead of letting it wave around the room aimlessly. It's what tells your brain which highway to keep reinforcing and which one to let go quiet from disuse. Without a decision, all that raw mental machinery, the filtering, the pattern recognition, the neural rewiring, just runs without direction, like a powerful engine with nobody's hands on the wheel. And there's something almost physical about the moment a real decision gets made, if you've ever experienced it yourself. A kind of settling, a quiet that arrives after what was previously just noise. People who've made a genuine decision about their financial future often describe it less like excitement and more like relief. The way a room feels different the instant an argument finally, actually, ends. That settling isn't poetic language. It's your mind, for the first time in a while, stopping the tug of war between competing, half-formed desires and pointing every available resource in one single direction. This is the exact spot where most self-help advice stops, satisfied with vague talk about mindset and positivity. And it's exactly the spot where the real mechanism is still hiding, just underneath the surface. Because deciding what you want is only half the equation. The other half is what actually happens inside a mind once that decision is made, charged with enough emotion to survive contact with a difficult Tuesday, a rejected proposal, a bank account that hasn't caught up yet. That process has a name. It has steps. And it is, without exaggeration, the closest thing to an answer for the question we've been circling since the very beginning of this video. What money is actually made of. So here it is. The thing we've been circling since the first minute of this video. The invisible force sitting underneath every dollar you've ever earned, spent, or lost sleep over. Money's raw material is desire. Not the polite kind. Not the passive kind that shows up as a New Year's resolution and quietly dies by February. A specific, burning, emotionally charged want, aimed at something exact, held in the mind until it stops feeling like a fantasy and starts feeling like an inevitability. That's the ore. That's the actual substance everything else gets built from. Everything you've ever seen someone acquire, a house, a company, a life that looks nothing like the one they were handed at birth, started as exactly that. A thought, carrying enough emotional heat to survive the trip from imagination into the physical world. But raw or isn't useful sitting in the ground. It has to go through a process. Hill described this transformation with a word borrowed from old alchemy texts, transmutation, the changing of one form of energy into an entirely different one. And he laid out, with almost mechanical precision, what that process actually requires. Not vague optimism. Specific ingredients, in a specific order. First, the desire has to be exact. Not I want to be comfortable someday, but a number, a date, a shape you could describe to a stranger without stumbling. Vague desire produces vague results, or more often, no results at all, because a mind can't build toward a target it's never actually been shown. Second, there has to be something offered in return, because remember, money was never a solitary thing. It was always an agreement between people, and agreements require both sides to bring something to the table. What are you prepared to give, to build, to become, in exchange for what you're asking to receive? Third, a deadline. Not because the universe checks a calendar, but because your own mind treats an open-ended goal completely differently than one with a date attached. Urgency does something to focus that patience alone never manages. Then comes faith, and I want to be careful with this word, because it's been worn smooth by overuse until it barely means anything anymore. This isn't faith in the sense of blind hope that things will work out. It's closer to a working assumption, a decision to act as though the outcome is already underway, because that assumption changes your behavior today in ways that pure doubt never could. A man who believes, genuinely, that his business will succeed makes the phone call that a doubtful man puts off another week. That phone call, not the belief itself, is what actually moves anything forward. The belief is simply what makes the action possible in the first place. And finally, and this is the part almost everyone skips, persistence. Not motivation, which is really just a feeling, and feelings are notoriously unreliable, gone by Wednesday afternoon. Persistence is what you do on the days motivation doesn't show up for work. It's showing up anyway, doing the unglamorous next step, especially when there's no applause for it. especially when nobody's watching, especially when the results haven't arrived yet and there's no proof. Only the decision made weeks or months earlier, still holding. Put those pieces together, a specific desire, something offered in exchange, a deadline, a working faith, and persistence that doesn't check for permission, and you have the actual anatomy of every Fortune Hill ever studied. Not luck, not a secret handshake, not being born in the right zip code. A repeatable internal process, invisible from the outside, that eventually produces something visible enough to hold in your hand. This is why money was never physical to begin with, not really. What you're holding, the bill, the number on the screen, the paid-off balance, is simply the last visible step in a much longer chain that started as a thought and traveled through emotion, through belief, through unglamorous repeated action, until it finally crossed over into something you could touch. The paper was never the beginning. It was always, only, the ending. And once you actually see that, once it stops being an idea you agree with and becomes something you feel is true, something shifts in how you spend your attention every single day. Because now you know exactly where to aim it. But here's what nobody tells you at this point in the conversation. The part that explains why so many people hear exactly what I just said, nod along, and still go home and change absolutely nothing about their lives. Knowing a thing and living a thing are separated by a gap most people never manage to cross, and it isn't a gap made of information. You could hand someone a perfect, step-by-step manual for building wealth, and they could read it twice, underline the good parts, even explain it back to a friend at dinner, and still wake up the next morning and do exactly what they did yesterday. If information were the missing piece, libraries would have solved poverty centuries ago. It isn't information. It's something quieter and far harder to look at directly. Hill spent an enormous amount of attention on this exact problem, and he traced most of it back to a single source. Fear. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that makes your heart pound in a dark parking lot. A slower, duller version, one that dresses itself up as caution, as practicality, as simply being a grown-up about things. He called the fear of poverty the most destructive of all human fears, and he didn't mean the fear of literal starvation. He meant something that infects people who have plenty to eat, a steady paycheck, a roof that doesn't leak, a background hum of dread about not having enough, about losing what little ground has been gained, about reaching for something more and ending up with less than you started with. You felt it, almost certainly, that flicker of hesitation right before you'd have to ask for what you're actually worth. The version of you that rehearses the conversation about a raise for 3 weeks and then, in the actual room, says something smaller and safer instead. The idea for a business that gets discussed at length, researched thoroughly, and then quietly shelved because what if it doesn't work? What if people laugh? What if you lose the money you already have? None of that looks like fear from the outside. It looks like patience. It looks like being sensible. That's exactly what makes it so effective at keeping people exactly where they are. Here's the part that should genuinely stop you for a second, because it flips something we already talked about earlier in this video. Remember the mechanism. Remember desire, held with enough emotional charge, transmuted through belief and action into something physical. That mechanism doesn't check whether the emotion driving it is hope or dread. It doesn't discriminate. A mind saturated with worry about running out of money spends just as much focused, repeated attention on lack as a hopeful mind spends on abundance, except it's pointed in the opposite direction. Worry is not the absence of desire. Worry is desire's shadow twin, just as specific, just as emotionally charged, aimed squarely at the thing you're afraid of instead of the thing you actually want. Think about what that means for someone who spends their commute rehearsing worst-case scenarios, who lies awake running numbers that don't add up, who mentions, almost as a nervous habit, that they'll probably never get ahead. That person isn't neutral. They're not simply failing to build wealth through inaction. They're actively, repeatedly, rehearsing scarcity with the exact same mental machinery that could have been building something else. The highway gets built either way. The only question is which direction it runs. This is not meant to make you feel worse about a habit you probably didn't even realize you had. Almost everyone does some version of this, because fear of poverty is woven so deeply into how most of us were raised that it rarely announces itself as fear at all. It shows up as responsible budgeting taken to a paralyzing extreme. It shows up as never quite feeling ready. It shows up as watching an opportunity pass by and calling it prudence instead of naming it for what it actually was. But naming it is exactly what starts to loosen its grip. Fear that stays unnamed operates in the dark, quietly steering decisions you think you're making freely. Fear that gets looked at directly, examined the way you'd examine any other habit, starts losing some of that automatic power. And there's a specific way Hill taught people to do this looking, a method that has nothing to do with forcing yourself to feel differently and everything to do with something far more precise and far more within your control than you might currently believe. Here's the method, and it's almost embarrassingly simple, which is exactly why most people skip past it looking for something more complicated. Name the fear, out loud or on paper, in a sentence specific enough that it can't hide anymore. Not "I'm worried about money in general," which is too vague to actually confront, but "I'm afraid that if I raise my prices, my clients will leave and I'll have less than I have now." Or "I'm afraid that if I quit this job, I'll fail publicly and everyone will know it." Something with edges, the same way a real decision has edges. Vague fear floats around your whole life like fog, touching everything, impossible to fight because there's nothing solid to push against. Named fear becomes a single object you can actually look at, turn over, examine from a few different angles. There's something psychologists have observed that fits perfectly here, even though Hill never had the language for it. When a person puts a precise word to what they're feeling, speaks it, or writes it down plainly, the emotional charge behind it tends to drop, almost immediately. Not disappear, drop. The nervous system responds differently to a fear that's been named than to one still circling in the dark, formless. It's the difference between hearing a noise in your house at night and lying there imagining every possibility, versus getting up, turning on the light, and seeing it was the cat. The fear doesn't need to be false to lose its grip. It just needs to be seen clearly. Once it's named, the second step is where Hill's research becomes almost startling in its consistency. He studied people who succeeded and people who failed, side by side, looking for patterns, and one of the sharpest differences he found had nothing to do with intelligence or talent. It was speed of decision. The people who built something real tended to make up their minds quickly, and once made, held to that decision unless genuinely new information demanded a change. The people who stayed stuck did the opposite. They deliberated endlessly, gathered opinions from everyone around them, changed direction at the first sign of doubt, and called this thoroughness, when really it was just fear wearing a more respectable outfit. So the second half of the method is this. Once the fear is named, make a decision anyway, small if it has to be, but immediate. Not because the fear disappears. It usually doesn't. Not right away. But because a decision made in the presence of fear does something a decision made in comfort never does. It proves, to the part of you that's been running the show quietly for years, that fear is not actually in charge. That's not a metaphor. It's closer to evidence, the kind your own nervous system pays attention to. Every time you act despite the fear instead of waiting for it to leave first, you're teaching yourself something that no amount of reading or listening to a video like this one could ever teach you on its own. Think of the woman who's been sitting on a business idea for 2 years, refining it in private, telling herself she needs one more course, one more certification, one more sign that she's ready. The fear underneath all that preparation has a name, if she's honest with herself. Something like, "I'm afraid that if I put this out into the world and it fails, it will mean something terrible about who I am." Named plainly like that, it looks almost fragile, almost small, compared to how enormous it felt while it stayed formless. And the decision that follows doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be quitting her job tomorrow morning. It can be publishing the first post, sending the first email, telling one person what she's building. Small, immediate, and completely different from another year of quiet preparation that was never really about preparation at all. This is the muscle almost nobody trains, because nobody ever told them it was a muscle. Not confidence, which people tend to treat as something you either have or don't. Something closer to a practiced reflex, the habit of naming what's actually happening inside you and moving forward anyway, in small deliberate steps, until the moving forward starts to feel less like an act of courage and more like simply who you've become. And once that habit takes root, something else starts to happen, something that has almost nothing to do with money directly, and almost everything to do with why some people seem to keep attracting opportunity after opportunity, while others, working just as hard, keep watching it pass them by. You've probably noticed it yourself, even if you've never stopped long enough to ask why. Some people seem to have opportunity find them. A referral shows up out of nowhere. Someone recommends them for a job they never applied to. A client sends 3 more clients their way without being asked. Meanwhile, someone working just as hard, maybe harder, sends out application after application into total silence. It's tempting to call this luck or connections or being in the right place at the right time. But Hill noticed a pattern underneath it that had nothing to do with chance and everything to do with a habit almost nobody practices on purpose. He called it going the extra mile, rendering more and better service than what you were actually paid for, consistently, without waiting to be asked, and without keeping score. It sounds almost quaint in a world obsessed with boundaries and getting exactly what you're owed and not 1 inch more. But think about the actual mechanics of it for a second, stripped of any moral language. When you consistently give slightly more value than the transaction required, you become memorable in a way that exact, even trades never manage. Nobody tells a friend about the contractor who did precisely what the contract said and not one thing more. People tell friends about the one who noticed a problem nobody asked them to look at and fixed it anyway. Here's where the relational nature of money we talked about earlier comes back around, because this is really the same law wearing a different coat. Money was never a solitary object. It was always an agreement between people about value exchanged. And the person who consistently over-delivers on that agreement is, whether they realize it or not, building something that compounds in a way a paycheck never does on its own. Trust. And trust, unlike a single transaction, doesn't reset to zero once the exchange is finished. It carries forward, quietly accumulating, the way interest accumulates on a balance nobody's touching. There's a principle in behavioral psychology that explains part of why this works so reliably. People feel a pull, often below conscious awareness, to return generosity with generosity. Give someone real, unrequested value, and something in them keeps a kind of informal, invisible ledger, one that eventually finds a way to balance itself, sometimes in ways neither person could have predicted. The contractor who fixed the extra problem gets recommended to the neighbor. The employee who stayed late without complaint gets remembered when a promotion opens up. None of it is guaranteed. None of it is a transaction in the immediate sense, but across enough time, across enough interactions, it behaves less like chance and more like a law quietly doing its work in the background. Hill took this even further with something he called the mastermind principle, and it's worth sitting with because it explains why so many people who succeed talk about their circle, their partners, their team, almost more than they talk about their own individual effort. 2 minds, working in real harmony toward a shared, definite purpose, don't just add together. Something new gets created in that alliance, a kind of combined intelligence neither person had access to alone. Ideas that wouldn't have occurred to you in isolation surface naturally in the presence of the right collaborator. Problems that would have taken you months to solve get solved in an afternoon. simply because someone else's mind was working alongside yours instead of you carrying the entire weight by yourself. This is why the person constantly attracting opportunity is rarely working in total isolation. They've built, often without ever using this exact language, a small collection of relationships defined by mutual value, honest reliability, and consistent generosity that goes slightly beyond what was strictly required. It isn't networking in the transactional sense, collecting contacts like trading cards. It's closer to gardening, tending relationships the way you tend soil, patiently, without demanding an immediate harvest, trusting that consistent care produces something eventually that no single transaction ever could. But here's the uncomfortable flip side of this, the part that deserves just as much honesty as everything we've said about generosity and trust. Who you surround yourself with matters just as much as what you personally practice, and for reasons that go far deeper than simple encouragement or discouragement. Hill had a word for the way most people move through their financial lives, and it isn't a flattering one. He called it drifting. Not failing dramatically, not making some catastrophic mistake, just quietly allowing whatever environment surrounds you to set the direction of your life instead of choosing that direction yourself. And the most powerful ingredient in that environment, more powerful than the news, more powerful than the economy, more powerful than almost anything else, is the small handful of people you talk to on a regular basis. You already know this is true, even if you've never said it out loud. Sit in a room with someone who's genuinely building something, who talks about problems as puzzles instead of walls, and you leave that conversation walking a little taller, thinking a little bigger than you were an hour before. Sit in a room with someone who treats every ambition as naive, who meets your excitement about a new idea with a list of reasons it won't work, and you leave that room smaller, quieter, already talking yourself out of the very thing you walked in excited about. Nothing was said that couldn't technically be defended as realistic, and yet something in you shrank anyway. This isn't weakness. It's how human beings are built. We're wired, at a level far below conscious choice, to absorb the emotional tone of the people around us. Watch a baby in a room where an adult suddenly looks afraid, and the baby starts crying before understanding a single word of what's happening. That wiring doesn't disappear once we grow up. It just gets subtler, dressed up in adult language, showing up as the vague deflation you feel after certain conversations, or the surprising lightness you feel after others, without ever quite being able to name why. And here's the part that stings a little, because it often involves people you love. Sometimes the environment quietly working against your growth isn't a stranger, or a toxic coworker, or some easily identifiable villain. Sometimes it's family. It's the people who knew you at your smallest, most struggling version, and who, without any real malice, feel a strange discomfort when you start becoming someone bigger than the role they've always known you to play. Ambition, in certain rooms, gets treated almost like betrayal. Who do you think you are? Asked half-jokingly at a holiday dinner, can carry more weight than its tone suggests. Not because anyone means harm, because change in one person quietly demands something uncomfortable from everyone standing near them. And most people, most of the time, would rather you stayed exactly where they can still recognize you. This doesn't mean burning bridges or delivering some dramatic speech about outgrowing your family. It means something far quieter and far more sustainable. Noticing. Simply noticing which conversations leave you feeling capable and which ones leave you feeling small, and adjusting how much of your inner world you hand over to each one. You don't need every person in your life to understand the size of what you're building. You need enough of your attention protected, enough of your genuine excitement kept somewhere it won't be talked out of you by people who mean well, but who are, understandably, still drifting themselves. Because remember the highway. Remember how repetition builds it, whether you intend it to or not. Every conversation is a small dose of repetition. Every eye roll at your ambition, every well-meaning warning about how hard it really is out there, every joke about lottery tickets when you mention a goal, adds one more pass along whichever road it happens to reinforce. You cannot fully control the world around you, but you can, with far more precision than most people realize, choose where you spend your most repeated, most emotionally available hours. There's one more piece to this puzzle, the quietest one, and in some ways the most important, because it has nothing to do with anyone else in the room. It has to do with who you believe yourself to be when nobody else is watching at all. Think about the version of you that exists at 11 at night, alone, phone in hand, quietly checking a bank balance you already know by heart. No audience there. Nobody to perform confidence for. Nobody to impress with talk of goals and vision boards. Just you, and whatever quiet story you actually tell yourself in that unguarded moment. That story, the one with no witnesses, is closer to the truth of what you believe about your own financial future than anything you'd ever say out loud at a dinner party. Psychologists later gave this a name, self-concept, the private, largely unspoken picture a person carries of who they fundamentally are and what they're fundamentally capable of. And here's what makes it so quietly powerful. It doesn't announce itself as a belief you could argue with. It operates underneath argument entirely, more like the water a fish swims through than an opinion the fish could examine and reject. You can sit through every seminar, read every book, nod along with every idea in this very video, and still return home to a self-concept that whispers, underneath all of it, this isn't really for people like me. And that whisper, quiet as it is, will outvote every conscious intention you've got, every single time, until it's addressed directly. Go back to Edwin Barnes for a moment, standing in front of Edison with nothing to his name. What made that moment possible wasn't a performance. Nobody was there to be impressed by his confidence except the one man in the room, and confidence alone wouldn't have carried him through years of ordinary work while he waited for his moment. What carried him was something quieter and far more durable, a private certainty about who he already was, held steady long before the world offered him a single piece of evidence to justify it. He wasn't pretending to be a future business partner. Somewhere inside, in the part of him no one else had access to, he'd already settled the matter. This is the difference between acting confident and actually being certain, and it's a difference most people never learn to distinguish. Acting confident is exhausting because it requires constant maintenance, a performance held up in front of an audience that might see through it at any moment. Certainty doesn't perform because it isn't for anyone else's benefit. It's simply the quiet, private terms on which you've decided to relate to your own future, terms that don't require applause and don't collapse the moment nobody's watching. Here's how you can tell which one you're actually operating from. Notice what happens in the moments furthest from any audience. How you talk to yourself after a mistake, alone in the car. What crosses your mind first when an unexpected bill arrives? Whether the private voice in your head, in its most honest, unrehearsed moments, sounds like someone rooting for you or someone building a case against you. That voice has usually been running on autopilot for years, inherited, absorbed, rarely examined, and it has been quietly shaping which highways get reinforced and which stay overgrown, far more than any single decision you've made on purpose. Changing it doesn't happen through a single dramatic realization, however good that might feel in the moment. It happens the same way everything else in this video happens, through repetition, deliberate and unglamorous, applied specifically to the private voice rather than the public performance. Catching the whisper that says this isn't for people like me, and instead of arguing with it, or drowning it out with forced positivity, simply offering it something else to say instead, quietly, consistently, in those same unwitnessed moments. Not a lie, not wishful thinking. A decision about who you're choosing to become, repeated in exactly the moments when nobody would ever know if you skipped it. And this, more than the desire, more than the decision, more than the fear you've learned to name and move through anyway, is where everything we've walked through finally converges into a single, quiet point. Because once that private certainty settles in, actually settles, something in the world outside you doesn't just feel different. It starts, slowly at first, and then unmistakably, to rearrange itself around a person who no longer needs proof before they're willing to begin. Go back, for a moment, to that piece of paper sitting in a vault, worth nothing in the fiber, nothing in the ink. We started there, and it's worth standing in front of it one more time, now that you're looking at it with different eyes than you were when this video began. You know now what it actually is. Not a source, a receipt. The final, visible trace of something that happened long before it ever reached your hand. A desire, specific enough to have edges instead of fog. A decision, made and held even when the outcome wasn't guaranteed yet. Faith, not as blind hope, but as a working assumption that changed what you were willing to attempt today. Persistence, on the particular afternoons when nothing about the effort felt rewarding. Fear, named honestly instead of left to run wild in the dark, and moved through anyway, in steps too small for anyone else to notice. Value, offered generously enough that trust had reason to accumulate. And underneath all of it, quieter than any of it, a private certainty about who you already were, held steady long before the world handed over a single piece of proof. That whole invisible chain, every link of it, is what the paper in your hand has always been evidence of. It was never the beginning. It was always, only, the ending. And once you actually see that clearly, not as an interesting idea to agree with, but as something you feel settle into place, you stop asking money to do something it was never built to do. You stop expecting the wall to produce its own light. Here's what that means for you, specifically, starting the moment this video ends. Every check you deposit from here forward is a record of a decision you made somewhere upstream. Every bill you struggle to pay is evidence of a filter that hasn't been retrained yet, not a verdict on your worth. Every opportunity that seems to find certain people effortlessly is the compounding result of trust they built quietly, one unglamorous interaction at a time, long before anyone was watching closely enough to notice. None of it was magic. All of it, every piece, was mechanism, learnable, repeatable, already available to you, right now, exactly as you are, with whatever balance currently sits in whatever account you're not thinking about at this exact second. Think about the two people we imagined earlier, the ones who grew up on the same street, went to the same school, worked the same kind of job. You now know the actual difference between them, and it was never talent, and it was never luck, and it was never some invisible advantage handed out at birth to a fortunate few. It was a chain of small, private, repeatable choices, made or avoided, in moments nobody else ever saw. Which means the same chain is available to you tonight, in whatever room you're sitting in right now, with whatever amount of money currently exists between you and the life you're picturing. Somewhere tonight, someone is standing exactly where Edwin Barnes once stood. No capital, no connections, nothing anyone else would call an advantage. Just a decision, made quietly, that hasn't been announced to a single other person yet. Maybe that's you. Maybe it's been you this whole time, and you just needed someone to say it plainly enough for it to finally land. The paper was never where the story started. You were. If this video gave you something worth carrying out of this room, don't let it end here. Follow the channel, so the next piece of this stays with you. And if you know 5 people quietly circling the same ceiling you've just started to see past, send this to them. Not because they need convincing, because sometimes all a person is actually waiting for is someone else showing them where to look.